with how do we communicate the good news of what it's like to walk with Jesus Christ in a context where people are increasingly isolated and lonely. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand the more connected we are, it seems like, yes, I have more access to more people in some ways, but I have fewer, deeper, meaningful relationships because everyone's only relating through pixels. In fact, I read a lot of studies this week about how different millennials are from baby boomers in terms of how many significant relationships they have. And so there may be some who are in this room right now, there may be some who are watching online or maybe listening by podcast. The truth is, you only have maybe a few folks that you would say really know you, and everyone else is like, well, I know that they're an acquaintance, but I don't feel relationally satisfied. That's a lot of the people, a lot of the time. And would you consider the possibility there are people in your life, maybe even you, who you would say, I really wish someone would be my neighbor. Now, you wouldn't want to be cheesy and say it that way, but that's part of the question of your heart is you're saying, is anyone going to be intentional with me? Does anyone want to open the door for me? Would anyone welcome me into their world? Let me be on the team. Be someone who explores the person that I am and the gifts that I have to share. That's the question behind this series. And Jesus has got some great things to share with us about it. We're going to look in his word to discover that. But one of the things that gets in the way, and you'll hear this every now and again, is racism, prejudice. And I feel like every time there's something like that blows up in the news, it's like, oh, we better have a message on racism. I wanted to have one before something blows up again. Like, I just think it's healthy. I think that we should do that. I really do think this keeps people off in their own corners. Even when we're around a lot of people of other races, there may be places in our hearts that we still need to take a second look at. So Jesus is going to help us do that. We're going to look at the parable of the good neighbor. And even though you may not have considered that from a racism or prejudice perspective, it is still in there, and we're still going to learn a ton. So let's take a look at it. It starts with this expert in the law. He comes up to Jesus and he says, hey, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Meaning, which ones of the laws? And Jesus is like, well, you tell me, what do you think? He's trying to test Jesus. Jesus is trying to test him back. And he drops Deuteronomy on him. He's like, hey, I think it's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Boom, Jesus, what are you going to do with that? Thinking you can tell by what Jesus says that he thinks he's pretty cool. He thinks he's pretty awesome. And Jesus doesn't really go into it because it seems like this guy's got a little bit of a pride problem. But obviously Jesus is like, hey, yes, that would be true. If you could possibly do that, if you could obey every law perfectly from the moment you were born, that might be possible. If you really always did love your Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, if you did that perfectly, that would be a way to inherit eternal life. The problem is you're already disqualified, son. You can't do that. You don't do that. I know you're going to pitch to me that you think you do that, but you don't. There's only one other way, and that is for someone else to live that perfect life for you and then die in your place and give you their obedience. That's really the only way to inherit eternal life because you can't do it yourself. But this guy doesn't have the time of day for that. So Jesus is going to tell him a story instead. He's like, yeah, dude, you could do that. That would be a way you should do that, but you're not going to be able to do that. And let me tell you a story about why. He asks Jesus, he wants to get a little bit of clarity. This is where he seeks to justify himself. It's right there in Luke 10:29. But he desiring to justify himself. What does that mean, justify himself? It means he's trying to tell Jesus, yeah, like me, like I got it together, don't I? Like, yeah, the thing you're telling me to do, I already do that, Jesus. Like, I already got this down. Hey, sweet, done deal. We're already done. He's trying to justify himself, and he says, and who is my neighbor? And Jesus doesn't really answer that question the way he's asking it. See, he's asking a who question, and Jesus is giving him a are you the right guy answer. He's saying, who can I not worry about, Jesus? Who do I not have to consider? Who's outside of, the parameters for me? Because I feel like I'm doing pretty good with these kinds of people. And it's pretty good of me to know the kinds of people I don't need to worry about. I don't need to worry about loving this or that or the other kind of people. And maybe some of us would even say that from time to time. Hey man, I'm glad that I can love the people I love really well. I don't know, if I really need to worry about the people that like that kind of music. I don't know if I have to worry about the people that have those kinds of piercings. Are those kinds of tattoos? I don't know if I really need to worry about the people who are into that kind of a hobby. It's kind of weird to me, kind of even a little wrong in my perspective. I don't know if I really need to worry about people from that region of the world or that kind of nationality or that kind of skin color. But I know about, like, if I'm thinking about the people I think are my neighbor, I'm just going to worry about these folks. And Jesus is going to tell a story and say, no, the next person you encounter is your neighbor. Everybody's your neighbor. But my question to you, expert in the law, is, are you a good neighbor? I'm not saying who is it. I'm saying, are you a good one? I'm saying, like, do you meet the criteria of what God would call someone who's actually being a good neighbor? You're not just worried about people that have a little bit different accent than you do, so you get to, like, not worry about them. No, it's everybody. And so he tells a story. He says, hey, once there was this Jewish man who was on his way down to Jericho. And on his way, he gets robbed, gets beat up, bloodied, probably left for dead. If he doesn't get medical attention, like, he's not going to make it. And Jesus says, and then along came these two folks. Now, these two people, these two men, were a priest and a Levite. Now, these are like heroes in the story for most of Jesus' hearers. They're like, all right, yes, someone's in trouble. Two good Jews, especially a priest and a Levite, so they're going to be especially close to God. They're going to be God's favorites. They're going to walk in there. They're going to save the day. I'm sure of it. They are the heroes, and yet they're not the heroes. So the first one, he's the priest. And we get the impression from Jesus' story, he sees what's going on here. Like, he knows that there's somebody hurt over there, and yet he crosses over on the other side and keeps on walking. Why does he do it? We don't know. Maybe he's in a hurry. Maybe he's like a priest. He's an important person. In case this person is dead, he doesn't want to touch him because then he's unclean, can't do his temple work. Maybe he's like, well, if I touch him, what if the bandits are still around? They're going to take me. I'm just going to pretend not to see it, going to keep right on walking. Okay, so he can't do it. Maybe it's this Levite. Levites were temple assistants. They would take care of chores and rebuilding things and fixing things and administrating the temple. Maybe it's one of these Levites. Man, that's a pretty big deal if you're a Levite. And Jesus doesn't tell us why, but for some reason, this Levite keeps right on going. Okay, I think probably he was doing what we do sometimes. You don't want to make eye contact with somebody. You're pretending you don't see him. Like, I'm just going to look at my phone. I'm real interested. What is this? Are you serious on The Bachelorette? No way. How could they do that? And you know they're there, but you're pretending this is the most interesting pixel you've ever seen in your life. I feel like that's what this Levite was doing. He's just pretending he doesn't see what he should see. And then Jesus surprises everybody. He shocks everybody who would have been listening, that would not have seen this coming. And Jesus says this. He says, Luke 10:33, but a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So this Samaritan sees this dude hurting, dying, and lying there bleeding in a ditch, and he has compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. He says, look, this is the only medicinal stuff I've got to maybe keep him from infection. I'm going to pour it on him, see what I can do. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. Now this but a Samaritan phrase, but a Samaritan had compassion. Let me clue us in what these hearers of Jesus are hearing. But Thanos had compassion. And they're like, what? Thanos doesn't have compassion. He's the bad guy. Or they're hearing, but Darth Vader had compassion. They're like, ugh, I don't see how that works. That's not how the story's supposed to go. That's how they're hearing this Samaritan word. Samaritans can't be good, man. They're not the ones with compassion. See, there was a racial fight going back and forth for the past 700 years between the Jews and the Samaritans. The Samaritans, the Jews thought, were these half-breeds, these people that had intermarried and worshiped pagan gods, and so they messed up all their Jewish blood. Now, they had forgotten that they themselves were worshiping pagan gods as well, but even so, there was a fight that had gone back and forth, centuries. And you know what happens when you find out somebody hates you? You just hate them right back all the harder. And so that's what they were doing. We hate you, and so it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse. How can a Samaritan be the good guy? How can a Samaritan be the one who goes first and has pity and has compassion on the person that is hurting? You'll notice the Samaritan wasn't the first to come along. He was just the first to be a neighbor. He was the first to love. He was the first to lean in. He was the first that said, I know it might be inconvenient for me, but I'm still going to be a neighbor to this person. Dr. Martin Luther King, commenting on this very passage, wrote this. He said, the first question the priest and the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? The Good Samaritan reversed the question and said, if I do not stop and help this man, what will happen to him?